Hello, everyone. It's still to wish you a very happy New Year. And we are pleased to welcome you to the first XR4EUROPE webinar of the year 2022. This is the first in a long series of events that XR4EUROPE will be bringing to you in the coming months. We are starting with an important theme for the future development of XR. Ethics will be at the heart of the concerns of the professional and European institutions that may one day have to regulate this evolving, this growing sector. To share these concerns with you, we are pleased to welcome Rosemarie Bernabe from the University of Southeastern Norway. And Rosemarie is surrounded by a very important panel of experts on the subject. After the presentations, you will have the opportunity to intervene via the chat. Rosemarie, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Alain. Good afternoon, everybody, if you're in Europe, and good morning or good evening if you're in other parts of the globe. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. This webinar is about ethics and XR technologies, and it will provide, hopefully it will provide insights, but at the very least, raise questions and challenges brought forward by the use, ethical challenges brought forward by the use of AR/VR technologies. And we probably would not be limited to raising ethical issues, but also regulatory issues. The questions that we will address, or at least look at or raise, will cut across several borders, including issues of equity and inclusivity, security and safety, governance, philosophical reflections on research ethical aspects of XR, interoperability, and XR research within an open science context. That's quite a lot of topics to deal with, but we hope that this would be an hour and a half of reflections and discussions. Well, I will introduce first the speakers, just to give an overview of our speakers. We have three of us come from the University of Southeastern Norway. We have Professor Rigmor Baraas. She's a professor of optometry and vision science. We have Cristiana-Anca Voinov. She's currently a PhD fellow of the I-Merse research group. We have Alina Kadlubsky. And from Germany, we have Alina Kadlubsky and Dr. Miltos. Alina is the managing director of OpenAR Cloud Europe, and Miltos is a senior researcher in Institute for Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis. I'm also from the University of Southeastern Norway, and I am a professor of medical research ethics. We will start with Professor Rigmor Baraas. She has in total 15 minutes. The first 5 minutes she will use to discuss the visual science behind the technology. And then she will give a talk on who gets to benefit from stereo vision XR. Rigmor?
Thank you so much, Rose, for this introduction and for introducing me. I will try to share my screen. So these two things will go one over to the next. So I will start with talking about vision science behind the technology. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this. So this is kind of a reminder for the last part of my talk today. So eye and vision is a neurological process, and color and spatial resolution varies a lot between individuals and depends on the cell density in the retina, number of pigments in the sensory cells, and the optics of the eye. And it also depends on a functioning brain. When we talk about depth perception and stereo vision, we can see or perceive depth or stereo if we have two eyes that work well together. These two eyes typically then give slightly different images to the brain, and the brain can then fuse them or combine them into one single image. So if you look at the cubes here, this is a simplification of how it might look. So you can see that the angle that each eye looks at this cube is slightly different, and that helps us to see and perceive that. So when we look at an object, we move the eyes. So we call this convergence. They move and converge towards this point or towards this object. And that's an important part of this, to get the images to fall in the center of the retina. Here I mark that with F. So when we look at an object that is close, and then there's an object that is slightly further away, the retina will pick this information up and know that there's a slightly different distances between them, and the angles viewed from each eye are slightly different. And that helps us to perceive depth in form of what we then say is stereo vision. And we humans are actually very good at discriminating depth if we have a fully developed central part of the retina, so the area around F, that we have normal vision or corrected to normal vision with eyeglasses in both eyes, and that we have adequate vergence control. So this thing that you move the eyes together towards that point you're looking at or the object you're looking at, and we have control over this so that we are able to fuse or combine these images into a single image. And we also need to have a fully developed areas in the brain to be able to process this retinal disparity. I'm not going to talk much about that, but both the primary visual areas needs to be developed, as well as the secondary visual areas. So when we simulate 3D in XR technology, we do more or less the same. We produce two slightly different images to be able to produce a stereo image. And the 3D display can simulate objects at any distance. And the stereo and divergence is like in the physical world. What is different is that we have to focus at a fixed distance all the time. So, and this is what challenges our visual system. The principle for producing stereo images in XR technology is exactly the same as that of Charles Wheatstone from his stereoscope in 1838 that he designed then. The difference now is that we have entire virtual worlds that we try to simulate at different distances and also with movement. So just to recap, normal vision with good binocular control in a natural viewing means that we look at different objects at different distances, and they fall on the same place in the retina, so we can see them single. And this system is neurologically linked. So it's not something that you think about, it's automatic. When you move your eyes to look at a different object, you will also connect the focus to that position, so you can see it both in focus and as a single object. When we move this over to 3D displays, the difference is that the eyes have to focus at a fixed distance all the time, and this is the distance of the display. So the focus to see something clearly is always where the green circle is in this drawing, whereas the object that we simulate can be at different distances. So this connection between focusing and looking at the same point, we break it in 3D displays to be able to simulate 3D. And this is what gives us this vergence accommodation conflict. And I thought that this is really important to mention and that you have in the background when I move over to talk about who gets to benefit from stereo vision in XR, because not everyone will. And I'm just giving you some examples first. I'm sure a lot of you know who Kate Moss is. She squints. And that means that she has only one good eye. When you have only one good eye, you cannot see in stereo. You don't have stereo acuity. And anything that's presented in XR technology or on a 3D display, she will not be able to appreciate. She will only see what's there for one of the eyes. Some of you may have heard of James. He made a video that was published on New York Times about the problems of having squint. He has a different kind of squint. He can switch which eye he uses, but at one time he can only see with one eye. So this means that he has very good vision in each of his eyes, but they do not cooperate. So he has no binocular vision and no stereo acuity. So if we look at this in the general population, we know that about 5% of the population do not have binocular vision, like Kate and James. They cannot see stereo or in 3D in real life, and they cannot, or in the physical world, and they cannot in a virtual world either. 10 to 15% of the population have what we call vulnerable binocular vision. So that means that they can see in stereo under certain circumstances, but it's vulnerable, and they might not be able to have stereo or to manage to perceive in stereo for a long time because of this. And not some of them can get improvements if you really work hard with finding the appropriate correction, but for some it's very difficult to make it work. And then 40 to 90% of the population, depending on where you are in the world and what kind of ethnicity you have, you will need spectacles or contact lenses. And if you don't have them, this will affect your function and stamina in working in XR if you don't wear your correction. This is just a world map of 15 to 20-year-olds, where you can see how much the differences in prevalence is in different refractive errors around the world. So it's not that we know exactly what it is. We need to find out from each individual what it is they need. So there is a large inter-individual variability in refractive errors and binocular vision status in the normal population. So this is common vision problems. In addition, there's a large individual variability in color and spatial vision. And I've made some simulations on the left there. And this also affects performance in XR, but I'm not going to talk about that today. So to sum up, 2 good cooperating eyes are necessary for stereo vision in XR. There's a neurological conflict, and this reduces stamina and performance in XR, even if you can see, and it's a big problem for some individuals. And if you have a refractive error, make sure it is corrected with eyeglasses or contact lenses and use them in XR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rigmor. I have neglected to mention that Rigmor is the director of the National Center for Optics, Vision, and Eye Care, the head of the Color Vision and Retinal Imaging Lab, and the team leader of the USN I-Merse research group. Thank you very much, Rigmor. If you have questions, please feel free to post your questions in the chat. After all the talks, we will have time for question and answer. Next, we have Cristiana-Anca Voinov. We fondly call her Chrissy. So Chrissy is an ethicist and doctoral research fellow at the University of Southeastern Norway. She works within the intersection of philosophy and science and philosophy of technology, and is particularly interested in the relationship between philosophical theory and practice. She will be talking about ethics and methodology. How can we be ethical using XR? Chrissy?
Thanks, Rose, for the introduction, and thank you, Rigmor, for the interesting talk. I'm just going to share my screen. All right. Okay, so my talk, as you can see, maybe not see, is about ethics. But rather than discussing the specific ethical problems posed by immersive tech, and there are many, I want to talk about what practicing ethics actually consists of. So what do philosophers mean when we talk about applying ethics? And I want to talk about this because we know that tech isn't value-free, right? It's not merely a tool. And there are many examples of this, right? A sloped or shortened park bench that aims at deterring homeless exemplifies our values, right? That's an example of the way we've embedded a technology with our value system. And this is a rather obvious one. But what about predictive software, right? Seemingly just a tool. Just recently, NPR has headlined that US software has over-predicted the recidivism rates of Hispanic and Black populations released from jail. So my point is that a team of people have designed and have redesigned and have embedded inevitably ethics into this work. And working with immersive tech now, we will inevitably encounter ethical dilemmas. And we can all, I think, benefit from a bit of ethical reflection. So the big question is, how does one apply ethics to immersive tech then? Well, to answer this question, I start by looking at the foundational approaches within the field of ethics, within my field. And we can generally simplify the field into three broad approaches, three broad categories: high theory, mid-level, and particularist approaches. I'm going to start with high theory. I'm going to briefly go over these, not in too much depth, just so you could get an understanding of how we systematize these approaches. So high theory attempts at establishing right from wrong through theory. Now, these theories are overall very abstract, and they have a wealth of reasoning and argumentation behind them, but they are presented generally in the form of an explicit rule. So an example of this is the right thing to do is that which produces the most pleasure and the least suffering. Now, this is one example amongst many. And then moving to mid-level. So mid-level theory reduces values to a set of principles. And this one seems very familiar, right? Whereas high theory has created rules based purely on reasoning, mid-level approaches say, no, each principle is found in the world. They are based in morals common amongst all people, so the argument goes. And then you weigh each principle against each other to figure out what the right thing to do is. And an example of this is the principle of autonomy, but we can think of many others, right? The principle of non-maleficence, the principle of beneficence, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, particularist approaches. They tend to decide a course of action based on its unique context, right? And this is difficult to give an example of. However, it's easier to understand if we look at it counter to high theory, right? Where the high theorist says right is a calculus of most pleasure and least pain. That was the example I gave earlier. The particularist says, wait a minute, that's not right. What about a torturer who derives immense pleasure from hurting his subjects? The rule in that case seems quite odd, right? And so their point is that context clearly matters. A bottom-up ethics clearly matters. Despite the plethora of approaches, high theory, mid-level, and particularist, and everything in between, the one that is by far the most utilized within bureaucratic settings, within clinics, policy, business, is mid-level approaches. And this makes sense, right? Bureaucracies, they like structure, we like rules, we like standards. However, my argument is that mid-level approaches are insufficient in mitigating potential problems posed by immersive tech or all tech. And I'm advocating for a rather pragmatic approach, right? We need to combine methods. Why? Well, mid-level theory, though useful for all of the reasons I mentioned, is typically used as a moral problem actually comes up. And I think that we can no longer take on a wait and see approach, right? XR is not your average technology. It has a very real impact on sense of self and meaning, and also knows a lot about us. And moreover, principlism is often used in a rather flattened form, almost like a checklist instead of actual ethical deliberation. And perhaps this is because we expect people to be ethical without giving them the conceptual tools or the interpretive skills to think about ethics. So clearly there is a timing problem and a lack of nuance in the way we end up applying ethics or practicing ethics. And I think what something like high theory can offer in all of its vastness and its historical philosophical insight is lessons on timing. Particularly, and I'm not going to talk much about this, but particularly thinkers like Aristotle, who talk about ethics as a continuous process that starts with the person in all that they do at all points. So if ethics is not merely a checklist, but is in fact part of our lives, our very way of being, we need to focus on three things, I think: ethics education, expanding ethics analysis, and ethics policy tailored to XR. I'm going to go into each of these. So for what I mean by ethics education is that the focus should be about developing skill sets where the person understands and interprets various ethical dilemmas, right? And there's empirical evidence to actually support that ethics courses at early levels do improve ethical decision making, but also more informally in the form of mentorships, right? Having someone who can actually exemplify what it means to be an ethical researcher, an ethical engineer, particularly in informal settings. I think that's where it really matters. And being aware of our own positions of power and how they in turn may be informally mentoring someone else or guiding someone else. Expanding ethics analysis. This is a point that many philosophers of technology have argued. We must expand ethics to each stage of creating technology, not just applying the rules once it already is in use, once the technology has already been designed and is implemented widely. So we need an analysis that draws on each method at all stages. So a question that we can ask, for example, is what is the intended effects of XR design? Is its intended design just? Is it fair? Does it do no harm, etc.? Another question we could ask is what is the method in which XR interacts with our lives? Does it force a particular interaction? Does it persuade? Does it seduce? And finally, and this is rather empirical, what are the actual effects of that interaction? This is ongoing, right? XR isn't a static technology. And moreover, my point is that it's an all hands on deck analysis. The designer, the engineer, the social scientist, they all have to entertain these questions at all points. And finally, and this is going to be my last point, we need to develop policy and ethics integrity instruments specific to XR, not to AI, not to adjacent tech, but to XR. And this addresses the problem of lack of nuance. And it's where particularism, where bottom-up ethics is especially important, because it sees these problems as emergent. So what sort of analyses emerge on close inspection of immersive tech? What I'm trying to say with a sort of pragmatic hopefulness is that we need multiple methods to tackle the issue of applying or perhaps being ethical and using XR. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Chrissy. We have next is Alina Kadlubsky. So Alina is an art director, web XR developer, director of communications of the Open Air Cloud Association, and managing director of Open Air Cloud Europe, as well as the lead strategist of the Cyber XR Coalition. She has a passion for immersive technologies, spatial computing, spatial web, and creating a human-centered future of computing. She will be talking about the need for XR interoperability, accessibility, and ethics, why we need to build a spatial future for all, with an emphasis on interoperability from an ethical perspective. Alina?
Hi guys, thank you Rose, and thank you Rigmor and Chrissy for your insightful talks, and I just continue. And just as a quick insight, since I'm not sure if all of our listeners are actually familiar what XR actually is or stand for. So basically it's an umbrella term that is basically a fusion of all the realities, including augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality, which consists of technology mediated experiences enabled via a wide spectrum of hardware, software, including sensor data, interfaces, application, and infrastructures. And XR is often referred to as immersive video content, enhanced media and experiences, as well as interactive and multidimensional human experiences. Just a quick insight what Open Air Cloud Europe is about. So basically we are the European branch of the Open Air Cloud Association, which is a global nonprofit organization founded in 2018. We have established our Munich-based branch organization July 2020, and the reason why we did that was to officially have a presence within Europe, and which enables us to collaborate much more closely with governments, academic organizations, and institutions like we did last year with most of our panelists today, and companies, and much more closely with organizations throughout the European continent. So basically, one of the reasons why we formed each other, or what we saw the last couple of years starting to emerge, is the current state of spatial computing is rather fragmented. There are already many existing spatial computing solutions out there, but few actually share a common interoperable language. We all know that large multinational companies are really realizing spatial computing today and investing heavily into this ecosystem. But this infrastructure is way too important to trust the industry alone. And that was one of the reasons why we founded our nonprofit organization. So the ethical issues are aggravated by the lack of interoperability, as we can see. So according to the European Commission, actually LAC is widely accepted. A standard slow down the development process and increase design and testing costs. So highly variable and fragmented ecosystems of proprietary XR technologies will make enforcement of standardized functions impossible. So basically we're lacking an underlying common language. Yeah, an XR platform that is designed for all of humanity in all its diversity, like in the real world, provides a universal open platform, which, much like the principles in the early days of the web, is desperately needed if we are to avoid a world of fractured ecosystems, which results in a fragmented environment of vocabulary, tools, methods, and approaches of proprietary walled gardens that we can start to see emerge. And it's also a burden for development and content creation because you're lacking in a common underlying language. Yeah, controlled by a few large corporations. So current devices have the potential to save large quantities of data on the cloud, but control lies with manufacturers, software developers, yeah, raising issues around privacy and freedom. Furthermore, the lack of a shared common language across XR technologies and devices limits our scalability and presents barriers for creation and developers. So what I'm trying to aim for is, it may be hard for some of us to wrap our minds around something that isn't quite ubiquitous just yet. So we're still emerging and it's still developing. Yeah, basically consider a world in which nearly all of our interactions involve looking through a wearable camera-equipped device that maintains a log on your location and purchase through the day, much like our smartphones. However, the insignificant difference with XR devices is that device will give service providers and vendors an even more fruitful source of consumed data. Yeah, with billions of camera capturing devices, constantly mapping its surroundings, so analyzing everyone and everything at any given time, and especially at any given time throughout our daily lives, is a risk of compromised privacy becoming orders of magnitude greater than we see today. So current digital framework were not really designed with accessibility as their foundation. Therefore, a post-production movement emerged to make digital systems accessible to all while this technological shift expands our capabilities, it also creates deeper social and privacy concerns which need to be addressed in a wider range debates across all industries. So this is not just only XR. What makes these emerging technologies so strong is the convergence of AI, deep learning, real-time data. So yeah. So basically the decisions we make today have a great impact and effect to our tomorrow. So basically we must act and ensure that everyone's interests are represented by supporting the development of an ecosystem that promotes open standards, security and compliance protocols, decentralized architecture, and a common spatial discovery service. So to tie into this, throughout the last 2 years, we've been working on an open spatial computing platform. What this underlies is basically a geopose, which, after all, for those of you who never heard of geopose or what the heck it actually is, it provides a standard for expressing and sharing geographically anchored poses. of objects with 6 dimension of freedom and reference to one or more standardized coordinate reference systems. So basically what we can see is basically it underlines this graphic here. So you have a device that could be a car, any sort of device, AR glasses, or a tablet. And that device sort of localizes, first of all, in the physical world, where am I in the physical space, and then also where am I in the virtual space. And then it localizes its 6 dimension of freedom pose. And this displays then, so basically it's basically in real time geolocating its space, and so it underlines a 6 dimension real-time updating map of the real world, basically. So why another standard? So today all systems that provide geospatially anchored poses and orientation do so in their own proprietary fashion. So as a result, developers implementing use cases that involve the sharing, saving, and querying or storing of geospatially anchored poses and orientation between 2 or more systems. And those must write to support the custom conversation and code. And converting between proprietary encoding increases the risks of introducing a variety of errors and delays. And yeah, and that was the reason why, since we are by nature are not a standards body, we've outsourced, and the GeoPose standard is currently being developed within the OGC standards body. In addition to the open spatial computing platform, we've launched last year our web client, which we are further developing within a research program that we've just launched through NGI with our universities, George Mason University and Rutgers University in New York, which, yeah, we are further sort of developing this open source WebXR client, and this is basically in addition to the open spatial computing platform. And yeah, the next couple of months we'll be sharing more about our research that is currently ongoing in this program. Yeah, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Alina. Again, if you have questions for any of the speakers, please post them in chat. We will have time later on to discuss. I will be presenting next. Okay. I will be talking about privacy and the use of XR for research and education in an open science environment. So I'm coming from the perspective of medical research ethicist. Okay, agenda is I want to talk about open science first. Next, to talk about XR technology as something intimate and persistent. Talk about the risk of re-identification after anonymization, and then some concluding remarks. Okay. So when we talk of open science, anyone who is doing research specifically in academia is probably familiar of the open science movement. By open science, we refer to extending the principles of openness to the whole research cycle, right? Fostering sharing and collaboration as early as possible, thus entailing a systematic change or a systemic change to the way science and research is done. Frequently, it's used as an umbrella term, and if you see the picture in front of you, by open science, we actually refer to different movements. It would be open notebooks, open data, open peer review, open access, open source, scientific social networks, citizen science, and open educational resources. At least for this talk, the most relevant of the different movements will be the open data movement. So When we apply for, for example, funds, when we prepare research proposals and submit it to the European Commission, there's this strong encouragement to open our data, right? So this is a statement coming from the European Research Council for anyone applying for ERC grants. And it specifically says the following: the European Research Council supports the basic principle of open access to research data. It therefore recommends to all its funded researchers that they follow best practice by retaining files of all the research data that they have produced and used during the course of their work, and that they be prepared to share these data with other researchers whenever they are not bound by copyright restrictions, confidentiality requirements, or contractual clauses. Of course, there is the possibility to opt out, and we understand why there is this encouragement, right? So we want data to be fair, that is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And that's a laudable cause. That's a very good cause. In fact, the European Commission has what we call Open Air, and Open Air is a platform for many other applications, such as, for example, they have what you call Amnesia. Amnesia is a function of Open Air that allows end users referring to researchers to anonymize sensitive data in order to share them with a broad audience. The service allows the user to guide the anonymization process and decide on a flexible trade-off between privacy guarantee and data utility, right? So if you happen to be funded by the European Commission and you want to share, or you have to share your data, Open Air can be of help in terms of how to anonymize it, still allowing you the flexibility to make the trade-off between privacy and data utility. All right, on top, but now side by side with that, now if you are a researcher who is encouraged to share your data, but at the same time a researcher that uses XR technologies, you know, another thing to recall or to remember is that XR technologies, or XR as an environment, is actually intimate and persistent. And what do we mean by that? XR is intimate. Just like, unlike any other technologies, probably unlike any other, it gathers very dense information about the person for every second that a user is in XR. And probably most of us will be very familiar with this, right? To function, a typical VR headset, for example, relies on several sensors of biometric data. It also needs AI to analyze data and to provide the designed or desired feedback. Now, for this feedback loop to work, combined with multiple sensors, XR technologies must record data persistently and ubiquitously. What do we mean by persistent and ubiquitous? The typical example that we see in articles that we read about the persistence of a data gathering and intimateness of data gathering in XR is this: spending 20 minutes in a VR simulation leaves just under 2 million unique recordings of body language. If that's not intimate and persistent, then I don't know what is. And we will be very familiar with this picture, right? And this is the loop, right? So we have sensors and hardware that will collect data, and this data will be analyzed, and the analysis will of course include AI. And, it will be rendered, allowing for some kind of feedback or application. And then again, collecting data, and then the loop goes on and on and on, right? You stay within the cycle for 20 minutes, then you have 2 million individual data on a person, what we call kinematic fingerprint. Now, if you move and use your phone, as what Alina was talking about, then you also share more than how your body works. You know, you also share your very specific location. And imagine if you're not just wearing a headset. If your research involves using a full body suit, such as this one, you know, then you would be giving much more than the average amount of personal and intimate information to the researcher, and therefore the researcher, at the hands of the researcher, is so much valuable and intimate information. This is the price that we pay for having such how do we call it, such well, technology that holds so much promise. Any technology that's good will always be a two-edged sword. We know that. We're not naive to that. So on top, well, meaning that the researcher in fact has to think of many things. Of course, there's the privacy issues because of a platform and developer issues. You know, the whole issue with Facebook, which we hope that the most recent Digital Services Act will address even partially. And there's also the whole issue of security and safety with the use of 5G. You know, so this is an example, or this is a security threat landscape of 5G. So if you use your XR technology in 5G, then on top of the privacy and security issues inherent in an XR gadget will be security threats posed by the use of a network. But this is not something that the researcher will have any control over, but something that the researcher would probably just have to know, right? But this is something that would, I think, affect on the one hand the almost requirement, if not the strong indication, to open data. According to certain studies, and this is a 2019 study by researchers from the Imperial College of London, it says that anonymizing personal data is not enough to protect privacy. This is the study that's being referred to by the article, by the blog from the Imperial College. It states the following: researchers have shown how even anonymized datasets can be traced back to individuals using machine learning, a type of artificial intelligence. The researchers say their paper demonstrates that allowing data to be used to train AI algorithms, for example, while preserving people's privacy, requires much more than simply adding noise, sampling data sets, and other de-identification techniques. That they need to do more than what we're doing now in terms of covering the identity or anonymization. In the paper, 99.98% of Americans were correctly re-identified in any available anonymized data set by using just 15 characteristics, including age, gender, and marital status. Now, think of this possibility, which research has shown is actually very possible, plus the requirement of opening your data. Now, with assuming that you have anonymized it. Remember that these are all anonymized data. Now, so with this in mind, I present at least two big agendas for researchers, but also for industry. Right, the agenda of course, the most immediate agenda will be to bridge this gap, the gap between requiring researchers to share data and the real threat of re-identification, even if the data has been anonymized. But maybe on a bigger scale. There's the agenda that I think is for society, for academia, but also for regulators. It's the agenda of reflecting really what we mean by privacy. You know, when we think of privacy, does the landscape of privacy we had 10 years ago, is it the same than the landscape of our privacy we have now? And if it's not the same, is the difference something that we want, or is it something that we have just been passive of, or maybe even unaware of? And if it's something unwanted, can regulation do anything to at least preserve whatever privacy that we have, or to reclaim the lost aspects of privacy, if that's even possible? Now, so the road is long and arduous, and all I can do right now is to present some specific agendas that I hope some of us would at least pick up on. Okay. That is it for me. Our next, but of course, our last speaker, but of course not the least, will be Miltos Ladikas. So Mirtos Ledikas is a senior researcher at the Institute of Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany. His current work focuses on global aspects of technology assessment, responsible innovation, ethics in science and technology policy, and science diplomacy. He will be talking about technologies, policy, and regulatory issues. Okay, Miltos, please.
Thank you, Rose. I hope you can see my slides, correct? Yeah, good.
Yes.
So thank you again for the introduction. Thank you for the talk so far. And I think my talk is going to naturally come now, I realize, after Rose's, because I'm going to talk about policy and regulatory. So I'm going to raise some issues in these few minutes that I have. And why? Because policy could, or even better, should be seen as the application of current ethics or current morality in legislation. So with that in mind, we have to remember, of course, that policy in general is rather reactive, not proactive. It's going to be years until we see some very specific XR regulations coming up. But nevertheless, there is a lot of proactive activity happening in terms of preparing the ground. And one of these is to look at the risk assessment part where the policy is based upon, and it's basically the risk of harm. And in the XR technologies, we have adopted dimensions of harm that we should be looking at. And when I say we, I mean also Rose and Rigmor, a group of us that are working in the area. And the first dimension is, of course, the physical one. Rigmor already talked about it, and other colleagues also refer to it. So we have not something radically different, but the use of it is radically different. So we all know the problems, the risk of harm from using a lot of screening times that have identified also in a young population nowadays. So now we have the 3D vision, which provides additional eye strains, and particularly for members of our, let's say, society. So we'll have to be looking at the eye health, but also at brain health, and how the XR technologies might affect our brain function, as anything else affects our brain function. The next dimension is a psychological one. That's it has a spectrum of possibilities there. One is for the perception of reality, which does seem to be affected, particularly to some people, maybe more vulnerable people, but still we do see possibilities that reality can be perceived or lost in the world of the XR. The creation of more isolation and the effects of the self-isolation that we might have in the psyche of the user. And as such, also the whole socialization process and how this is affected by the extensive use of XR technologies. Furthermore, we have the societal aspects of it. Privacy is one of them. Rose spoke very nicely about this is the aspect, but also possibilities of neglecting of the environment, as the virtual environment is very different from the real environment, so to speak. And also how we deal with the risky content that might come through XR technologies, and it will be even much more prominently imprinted in someone's psyche. Finally, financial issues. We do have, as Rose said, the possibility of identifying not only people, but everything and anything around them. Identity theft is an issue here as well, and it can become even more prominent, but also have issues like the virtual ownership in the virtual space. And again, the data monopolies that, again, we heard Rose talking about that, which is going to become even more prominent through the use of XR technologies. In terms of policies and where are the issues, all the policy domains that we have to be looking at, and there I also adopt work that we did for the European Parliament on deepfakes, which I think works very well in this system. So one who have the technology domain. So mainly it's about artificial intelligence systems. AI is still a weak AI. We are far from a strong AI, but XR technologies will bring about a much faster development of strong AI. And we need also to look at possibilities to better regulate AI. For that reason, the AI regulatory framework, of course, is the main instrument that we have at the moment, but it might not be enough. In terms of the creation, here we have the technology developers themselves, but also the creation of the technology ecosystems through this development that again is affected very much and based upon deep learning technology. So one would say that again the AI regulatory framework is the instrument that we should be looking at and analyzing. In terms of the circulation, we have the platform services. Platforms are becoming more and more important, monopolistic, but also very strong lobbies and areas of activities. So we need to pay a particular attention in the platform services and how we develop guidelines about that. The Digital Services Act is also the instrument to look at that nowadays, and one has to be even more specific about the possibilities that XR technologies will bring about and what guidelines this might need. Then we go to the target, which is basically the user of the technologies. There, clearly we have the data protection and the privacy issues. Rose talked about that anonymous data sets with 15 characteristics can identify people. I know that from peripheral research that nowadays a lot of platforms, a lot of data, let's say big data companies, they work with up to 6,000 characteristics per person. So you can imagine how far data protection and privacy is affected there, and the GDPR is also the instrument for that. Finally, we have the audience itself that refers to the whole of society as an audience, and there we need to look at what technological citizenship means and how we can enhance technological citizenship in Europe. We do not have legislative instruments there. We don't have policy instruments. Horizon Europe is taking a view on that, not a strong view yet, but it's definitely the way to identify and work in this area as well. Finally, when we talk about policy interventions, where we really need to intervene even proactively in order to have a good development and regulation at the end of the day, there are certain areas that one will have to look at in some detail. I'm drawing again from work that we did for the German Parliament here. And the first intervention should be done in the virtual space itself. And the virtual space will need to be regulated in terms of data protection, as we have said, but also data security, or perhaps even the creation of data trusts around some cases. We're talking about open science, but also to look at issues of intellectual property rights, copyright issues, exploitation rights, and whether how copyright or a patent is more a better instrument to look at the IPR in the virtual space. In terms of innovation, we need to start very early at looking at the standardization of devices, so we can avoid the mess we have seen happening in a lot of ICT in the last years, which took a lot of work. Actually, we're still in the process of standardizing anything from devices, platforms, and even chargers, as a matter of fact. We need to look at more of the development of the serious games that can be very useful, as a matter of fact, in a lot of work that we're doing, and not least in terms of training. And for that, and for any kind of application, we need to promote interdisciplinary application research. Is not the standard, but it is becoming more and more required. And this is also why we are here represented so many disciplines in this panel, but this has to be also the standard view of research funding in this area. And also we need to promote the involvement of SMEs and startups, give them actually appropriate incentives to do that, because SME is still the backbone of the European economy, and startups is something that we can do much better than we do nowadays. In terms of physical and mental impact, we simply need more research on the long-term effects. We have very little of that because, of course, we do not have a lot of data, long-term longitudinal data yet, but we can draw conclusions already, or at least preliminary conclusions by looking at what we have so far, but we need to do more research on it. And finally, looking at the technology misuse, there are a lot of possibilities of technology misuse in XR technologies. And the only way to deal with that is to strengthen the media literacy. That starts with children. That's in Europe, I can even say in Germany, also in particular, there is very little media and technology literacy, as a matter of fact, but we can also help by trying to create some type of quality stamps for XR technologies and XR applications. And with this, I'd like to thank you and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Miltos. We now open the floor for questions, but I will probably call Mael for this.
Yes, thank you. So right now I would like everyone to actually turn on their mic. I mean, to the speakers. Thank you so very much for your for all your speaking points, which were extremely thorough and cross-cutting various domains of applications and frameworks. So that was very interesting. So I would like all of the speakers to actually share with us so that we can all see you. And we have one question, Rose, related to your presentation, which had to deal with whether or not there was a special data management system in Norway for handling such data being gathered in an XR setting.
No, we have, well, as far as I know, we don't have anything special for data gathering using XR technologies. We have the same regulations and platform, irrelevant of how the data was gathered and what type of data it is. Rigmor, you probably have.
Yeah, no, there isn't yet. We have to sort of plan this for each of our projects and how we do it.
Yes, so the Norwegian Center for Research Data I think has the same regulation for all types of research, relevant of what how it was gathered and what type of information or how intense the data might be.
Thank you. If there's any other questions, I see that for now there's not that many questions in the chat. Just okay, there's one here. So the NVIDIA Omniverse project made quite an impact on the scene. What is your opinion on the role of this platform for your projects? So that's one question from Akim. I don't know who would be more suitable to actually answer this question, or if there's any reaction among the guest speakers as to this question.
Probably this will be either Alina or Miltos.
I didn't get actually this project. I don't think I know it, but I didn't see it written. Well, let me check.
Ah. But so we have another, in the meantime, because you can also see them in the chat, there's another question, which is how to curb the intensification, pervasive influence of US-based tech companies in the EU. Should EU focus on owning and creating their own XR technologies?
May I try to to give a little bit of
course,
work? EU is trying actually to own its data, its personal data, its technologies, and is trying to be also a player in any kind of AI development. But EU is far behind. One has to say that there are many reasons for that, and many people have different ideas why this is the case. But there is a wide spectrum of reasons. One is that we have a very good legislation. We have a GDPR legislation which is already there, but the GDPR is hindering as well, of course, the data accumulation. Data accumulation is the way to a strong AI. So one might say that's fine because we have AI with values, with European values, as we say in Europe. Okay, I go with that. But still, the development in AI is happening elsewhere, not in Europe. It's happening in the United States and it's happening in China. For the reason of actually they do not have such a GDPR type of issue. But nevertheless, as you have seen with Digital Services Act, with actually a lot of work that the Trade Commissioner has done as well. We do try to have our own stand when it comes to online platforms, actually, and how we have our own specific regulations and protection for the European citizen on that.
May I? Regarding this, yes. So there's the question on NVIDIA Omniverse.
Yeah, I'll be happy.
Yeah, I think Alina would be, yes.
I mean, we as an organization, we are obviously looking in what the tech giants are doing, and also with Omniverse, it's quite interesting to see that NVIDIA is opening up their platform. So obviously, in our regards, it's quite great to see that tech companies are trying to open up their platforms, which is quite good for our systems. When it comes to the platform that we are building, we actually see it more as a glue. So if people want to use a different platform, it's not, our platform should not be hindering, especially with the geopose that we actually implement. We are currently testing it in various test beds that are taking place. One is actually the research project that I was referring to. And also here we're trying to actually also use GLB and sort of 3D systems that actually are interoperable between systems. So to not make sure that it only works on iOS or Android. So even here with what we are currently sort of seeing is we want to make sure that whatever we build works cross-platform, cross-device, and cross systems and hardware. So this is at the core, especially when it comes to making sure that we build something interoperable. It needs to work with everything. So obviously we are looking at the development of what's going on in the industry, but it's really good to see that companies are following this standard and rather, opening up their system. So that's really good to see for us. I hope that answered the question. I'm not sure.
Thanks, Alina. Is there any other comment from the speakers on that very topic, or should I move on to another question from the audience? So there's one question again from Hossein, sorry if I'm not pronouncing it well, regarding the privacy of the data subjects. Do you find any capabilities in blockchain technology for overcoming those kind of issues?
Yeah. I can give a brief response, and and my apologies that the response will be, well, yeah, there has been a lot of talk about the promise of blockchain technology in terms of privacy. But whether in fact it does remains to be seen. There is one project now within Europe. It's called the Responsible Open Science in Europe project, and one of the tasks of the project is in fact to look into blockchain as a possibility to maintain privacy in a research setting. So yeah, this has been talked a lot, and in principle it seems to hold promise, but whether it stands in real life is something that remains to be seen.
If I'm also might add a quick point there, that blockchain is of course a great way to keep let's say privacy, and also certified by the way the certification agency. But still, technologies are owned and data are owned by those who provide the technology. So platforms are quite strong, actually. The regulatory issue of the blockchain technology is far from being resolved, of how blockchain can be part of the regulatory high-tech, basically, system that we have, high-tech innovation system.
Any other additional comments on that topic?
Yeah, one quick thing, and I think we also should keep an eye on what Tim Berners-Lee is currently doing with the SolidPod project. So definitely this could also be a solution regarding a decentralized data storage and being in control of the data. So this is also a project that especially we are having an eye on, because it's also being developed within the EU and with yeah, one of the founders of the World Wide Web. So definitely, if you haven't heard about this project, yeah, have a look at that as well.
Great, thank you, Alina. So there is a question for Rigmor. So the very first presentation of this panel. So as I understand, monocular depth cues are a strong source depth perception. For some publications, even more important than binocular. So I believe that even people who have only monocular vision can gain from using XR. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that. If the content is set up with only the use of monocular cues, then of course someone who sees only with one eye will be able to perceive those depth cues. And they are strong depth cues in physical life, monocular cues. However, it depends on what you want to do with the content. Is it going to be used for learning? Is it going to be used for doing a job that requires some precision? Then stereo plays a very big role. So one of the things that are associated with better or improved learning in XR is related to the feeling of presence. And the feeling of presence is also very, very strongly linked to that there is actually stereo information and that you can perceive stereo information in XR. It all depends what you want to use it for, but if stereo is an important part of either doing the task, learning, or for example, a manufacturing job where you require high precision, then you have to have stereo in, for example, HoloLens. So it all depends what you want to do with your content, with your technology. But if it's stereo, you really need to know who it is that you are asking to use this technology for the given task.
Thank you. We have a thank you from Alexi, who asked the question. Then we've got also a question from David Murphy. What do the panel think are the main ethical considerations of using biosensors in XR, for instance, BCI, EEG, HR, etc.?
I can give a quick response, and
yes,
maybe others too. So yeah, well, of course, the question I raised a while ago will be relevant for this. I mean, you know, that there's too much, it produces so much information, etc. But and therefore creating a very kinematic fingerprint, which can be a risk of privacy. But then there's also the issue that when we talk of research ethics regulation, when when it's just gathering some kind of data such as this, there's the tendency to consider it as non-interventional. Usually when we talk of interventional studies, these are medical studies where you use a specific device or medical intervention, or you do something like surgery. But when it comes to gathering biometric data, most of the time this is considered non-interventional, meaning that it's considered as low risk, which is not necessarily the case. Now, if it's considered low risk, it goes to maybe a quick review of an ethics committee, or not even by an ethics committee. Right? Now this is the existing shall we say, perspective of how to regulate data. Now, which means the issue then would be raised: do we continue to think of data this way? That if it's just gathering of data, that it is not interventional, meaning that it's low risk, that then therefore no ethics committee will have to review it? Or should we change it precisely because of how data is gathered with technologies such as XR technologies? Now, so I think there are a lot of questions, and question of privacy is just one of them. But the whole system of how research ethics is regulated also comes in the picture.
Thank you, Rose. Is there any other remarks that you would like to add up on Rose's answer? All right, so we have, I believe, another question from Hossein as to, because of course, ethics is a very large topic that, you know, there is no right or wrong answer as stated. So the question is, do you think data monetization will help improve data sharing's ethical considerations?
I could try to give a quick answer to that, because that depends on what you mean by data monetization. I mean, data has been monetized already. We just don't know how. It's you know, the Facebook and Google and even Apple, even Amazon or Huawei or so on and so forth. They are data. He wants to say something. Maybe shall we give him the floor so that he can explain a little bit.
Of course.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the great webinar. Thank you all. By data monetization, I meant two-way data monetization, not only the data processors. So the data could be monetized, I think, from both sides, both the data subjects and the data processors. So in this kind of data monetization, do you think it will improve the data sharing, like the ethical considerations?
Let's say the data from the user side is not monetized, and for an obvious reason. What is the value of that? We don't know the value. We don't even have the methodology to find out a value. I would like to do that. Actually, I have a colleague who is trying to do that. It's an extremely complex issue. But I believe that we should go down that route, to be honest, because then we'll have a better, fairer, as a matter of fact, deal with, let's say, the data accumulator, the data platform, the data services, and the data user. But I think we're a long way from that. But efforts are being done. So the answer is, in that sense, yes.
Thank you.
So I see that there's no more questions on the chat just now. We have about 7 minutes left till the end of the webinar. If there's, I don't know, like maybe a question that Rigmor would like to raise among the guest speakers, please do.
Yes. There is one thing I would like to raise, which is sort of linked to Chris's talk and Miltos's talk. And it's kind of related to risk of harm, but in a slightly different way. Because as I tried to show you, a lot of people might not be able to sustain usage of this technology for any time because of discomfort, or maybe they can't do the job or do the learning they need to. So my question is, if we put this into context, as Chrissy spoke a little bit about, so either the context is school maybe, or the context is work. How can we evaluate how much pain a pupil or a worker should sustain if a situation is that they have to use this technology for learning something, or they have to use this technology for doing their job? How do we evaluate that? And how do we protect people also? You know, laws of labor that we have in the EU is, you know, are the work that needs to be done in relation to this, because this kind of technology is much more invasive in this sense than an iPhone or a VDU screen. And we do have a VDU directive in the EU. Sorry, it's a little complex, and I don't want any answer. I want some reflections. Thank you.
Should I go first? Or I have a quick reply to that. First of all, as I said in my talk, we still need research. We need research on the physical and the mental, actually, the impacts of the XR technology. That will be part of it as well, because you're talking about the physical strains, you're talking about even loss of labor, but there are also mental strains, of course, that come together with that, because, you know, you become even a stronger minority than you were before. You become a vulnerable person suddenly. You might not have been a vulnerable person before. Now you become a vulnerable person if this technology is widely used where you are. So you fall under even a different legislation, if you like, that cover these certain vulnerabilities. So we don't have that yet, because it's not applied widely yet, and because we don't even have the data to analyze that. But of course, we need to have more clinical trials, if you like, and that includes also mental issues. They are not only physical. So that's one thing, I suppose, to answer that. The other thing is that if we accept that XR technologies have a strong, well, actually are more or less strongly related to AI development, and the deep learning aspect of it is an important factor why we use XR technologies. The regulatory framework is including AI used in a vocational training, for instance, or educational purpose vocational training as a high risk AI technology. As a high risk, it falls under very strict regulations of how this can be used, which are not yet finalized, but we tend to see then this type of application, as you said, as a high risk application in any case in the current thinking.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Miltos that we need more research. This is also assuming that XR will be ubiquitous to let's say students in various countries, that they'll have to rely on this technology to do X, right? And we don't know that will be the case. I mean, I suppose we could assume that XR will have the sort of ubiquity a computer does, in which case we need to think about accessibility now, starting now, and what that means. So I always, well, I don't always, but I advocate for a strong precautionary principle when it comes to this kind of technology, especially given all of the unknowns, of which there are many.
Thank you very much. We have maybe one last question just before we start closing the webinar. From David Murphy again. Any suggestions on how to encourage XR designers and developers to think more ethically I hold a discussion session with my developer students each semester. Is there anything else that the panel could suggest? Very open question as well. Again, is there anyone who wants to?
I'll be happy to take that. I mean, first of all, I think it's important that we have a diverse team. I mean, we are seeing this when it comes to hardware or software. If by nature, in the whole development process, from ideation to the end product, it's a diverse team of diverse people, the outcome is for sure differently. And there are various researchers out there where also already from Microsoft, where there are actually so many developers who never heard of accessibility by design and stuff like that. So definitely there's also a knowledge gap due to gender gap and diverse. I mean, if we have inclusive team, if we have minorities and already included, not just only in the testing, but in the whole process of production, the outcome will be different. And I think that's key in that.
Can I have just like one little statement? So I just want to put together the question of David and the question of Alexis. Alexis' questions about ethics committee. So is there an ethics committee that deals with XR studies? At least from a very European level, that does not even exist. And because the law in Europe says that the ethics committees are so devolved. Yeah, it depends from one nation to another. For example, in Norway, it will just be the Norwegian Council for Research Data. For the Netherlands, you have, for example, ethics committees that deal with social science research, but it's very devolved. There is an organization of European ethics committees, but it doesn't do that task. Now, in terms of encouraging designers and developers to think more ethically, I think XR4Europe actually is initiating this. And therefore, I think Mael could say something about that.
Yes, a very nice way to actually maybe come to a close to the webinar as well. So we really think as a pan-European association that's trying to foster like different initiatives and also like the professionals of the XR industry in Europe, that it is actually key that we try to address and have working groups set up that are trying to really seeking towards the good development, if I can put it that way, of future policies that are encompassing ethics, privacy, and data, etc., etc. So this is also something that we are hoping to be able to build all together in the next couple of months and for this year to go. So yeah, this was a little bit of a concluding remark. So I see that it's almost time. It was an absolute pleasure to have all the guest speakers joining us. Really interesting conversation again about ethics, which is ever evolving, of course, because of the advances and the ever-changing nature of the technology as well. Thank you very much to Prof. Rigmor, Baraas, Cristiana-Anca Voinov, Alina Kadlubsky, and Prof. Rosemarie Bernabe, as well as Dr. Miltos Ladikas for joining us for the very first webinar of the year of XR4Europe. And we really hope to see you very soon for our next webinar. Hopefully that will be happening in a couple of months' time. Thank you very much, and see you very soon. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.